Perfect.
Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Friday. Like Ms. Hildebrand mentioned, I'm going to keep today simple and kind of wrap up what we talked about over the last couple days. For breakfast, I had tortilla chips and queso cheese. So that wasn't the healthiest option, but yeah, I was nibbling in the kitchen. So anyway, I'm just going to focus on this one picture. This is a map of Gettysburg. This is the town. The town itself is to the north, where you see the words Gettysburg, and that's where the first day's battles took place off to the left there. Then the second day's battles took place in the town and a little bit farther south. And then finally, the third day, you look a little bit south. That's all like rural farmland, where it says Gettysburg National Military Park. That's where like the third day's fighting had taken place. So I kind of just wanted to wrap everything up and kind of talk about Gettysburg itself, like why Gettysburg. Well, it was significant because it was the turning point of the war. The war began in 1861, and by the summer of 1863, the Confederate Army, while they had numerous victories and were doing pretty much okay, they didn't have the ability to go on the offensive. They kind of wanted the respect of foreign countries to maybe get involvement from other countries. They can kind of prove that they can go on the offensive and win on the North area, and also most of the fighting had taken place in the South and in Virginia, and the area is very war torn. So they were low on supplies, not just guns and ammunition, but food, clothing, shoes, everything. So they wanted to kind of take the battle into the North. So the first state is Pennsylvania. And there was numerous locations. Even some people in Pittsburgh were even worried about the Confederate Army coming through. I tried to find some pictures of people who lived in Pittsburgh actually built like breastworks and defenses, expecting for the Confederates to the south to come through. They did go through other towns like Carlisle, Chambersburg, York, Lancaster, Hanover. They're kind of probing a way to take the what's that?
Hershey.
I'm not sure if they made it up to Hershey. But it kind of happened by accident. But the location itself makes Gettysburg a prime location. If you're able to look at that map, you see all those roads coming in and out. There's probably at least a dozen different roads that come in and out of Gettysburg, and they all go to major towns. Baltimore, Emmitsburg, out to Carlisle, Chambersburg, etc. So it's easy to kind of move a large amount of soldiers around. But it was accidental because they didn't know, the South didn't exactly know where the North was, and vice versa. And that's where we have the first contact happening on July 1st near an area called McPherson's Ridge, which is just to the left of the word Gettysburg, where you see the town. And to kind of give you an idea, Gettysburg's like your average small little Pennsylvania hamlet. At the time of the battle, there was only around 2,400 residents, so it really wasn't a lot of people. Most of them were farmers and whatnot. But the overall scope of the troops was there was over 170,000 troops from both the North and the South that met there. So you can kind of think of a tiny little town with 2,400 people. All of a sudden, now there's 170,000 more people added into this. And to kind of put it in perspective, the seating capacity for Heinz Field is 50,000-60,000 people. So we've all watched Steeler games. We've seen them like the big crowds there. So imagine 3 times the amount of people that you see at a Steelers game in a tiny little town. To kind of give you like how like bombarded this small little town was, how overwhelmed they were. Following the battle, there was around 50,000 casualties. So that includes those who had died and those who were injured or missing. So you look at 170,000 troops minus 50. You probably had a 1 in 3 chance of making it out of the Battle of Gettysburg, which isn't really good odds, unscathed, certainly by those numbers. And again, this makes it the largest battle ever fought in North America. Anything in Canada, the United States, or Mexico.
I have a question.
Yes.
When did they do the Civil War?
The Civil War was fought between 1861 and 1865.
Holy crap, that was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago, 155 plus years now. So yeah, it was a very large battle, and like I mentioned earlier in the week, it was very significant, and it's held up there with other battles such as D-Day, Napoleon's Waterloo. I mean, anything you see these large battles in history, Battle of Marathon, Hastings, very significant event in world history. And I also mentioned that, and I'll wrap up here with, I mentioned, Abraham Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg, and he wanted to kind of, speak about the importance of why to carry this war on, and we have to kind of get this over with because we want to stop seeing this carnage. The carnage that was unfolded at Gettysburg upset a lot of people, and it's like, how can we stop? We want to stop this war, but at the same time, we have validity in why we were fighting. So I'm going to pull up on my phone the Gettysburg Address. It's a short speech. It's only, I think, around 300 words, and it's pretty poignant. And it's also known as one of the greatest speeches in history as well. When you guys get older, you start taking speech 101 classes and stuff. I'm sure at some point you're going to come across this again, and somebody may actually try to make you remember it. But here it is. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they fought here have thus far so notably advanced. It is rather for us to be here, dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. So do you guys have any questions about the town of Gettysburg, the battle, anything we talked about all week?
Yes, I do.
What do you got?
What was I gonna say? Are there how long is Gettysburg? Like, how big was the battle?
Well, how large was the battle? It took place over 3 days, from July 1st to July 3rd, 1863.
So is there a thing we celebrate? Is there
Well, I'll tell you what, we don't exactly celebrate, but what is the day after July 3rd?
4.
July 4th, right? We celebrate that. That's Independence Day. So two things actually happened. That's interesting you brought that up. The following day, July 4th, news eventually traveled over that the South was beaten back. So it made celebrating the 4th of July a little bit more important. And another important event during the Civil War was at the time, Vicksburg, Mississippi, was a large city down south, was under siege by the Union Army. And the siege was broken, and Vicksburg collapsed on the 4th of July as well. So those are two pretty big events that happened that made it worth notably celebrating the 4th of July again in the United States. So that's a great question. And also, not really celebrating, but remembering. In November in Gettysburg, they do something called Remembrance Day. So it's almost like a Memorial Day, not a Memorial Day, like a Veterans Day, where we honor those who were lost. So they do parades, and there's lots of stuff that go on there, and different ceremonies to remember the fall of Gettysburg. That happens in November, which coincides when Lincoln would have given his address a few months later. So, any other questions?
Nope.
All right, awesome. Well, I appreciate it. Hope you guys have a great Friday and a great safe weekend. Have fun, and I'll turn things back over to Mr. Hildebrand. All right, guys. See you later.
Okay, thank you.
Tony.
See you, Mr. Tony.
Bye.
You're welcome, guys.
Mrs.
Welcome back, Missy.
Hildebrand. Mrs. Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Tony.